Hello guys, this is Fahim again, and this is my week 8 tech seminar video. And this week I will be talking about microservices and monoliths. So at, an app that we create can have either of these two approaches to how it is made. Mainly we are talking about the architecture of that specific app or service. So it can either be a monolith or a microservice. Let's talk about what these are and what are the disadvantages and advantages, and also which one we should be choosing for our next project. So let's talk about monoliths first. All applications and services were a monolith before in the olden times, and monolith architecture has stood the test of time because there are still many applications that are monoliths. So in a monolithic architecture, there's just one application or just one um, code base that manages everything and connects to databases. So this means that it is much easier to start up monolithic architecture, because this is usually how new um, projects start off. They'll start off as monoliths because you don't have to worry about different stuff, because when you start off you're just focusing on what you want to solve, right? The problem that you want to solve, or the app that you want to make, is just one single thing, and you keep it simple and make it a monolith. Now this monolith will be doing all of the functionalities of our application. Now the advantage of this is that, as I said, everything is together in the same place. So that means that um, we don't have to worry about things like dependencies, or if something does not become available, or things like that. And this can also be easier because, as I said, it's much easier for a company that is, or an application that is just starting, right? And in the case of microservices, um, there is a lot of applications or programs that do different things. So for example, we have an application, a program that manages communication between um, users if it is a chat feature, and there's another program that manages the notifications that the user gets, and there's another one that manages the feed, or what the user sees in their feed, if this is a social media example. So this means that there are different things that manage different services, right? This means that the advantage of this is that we have different things that do just their work. So everything is separated out very cleanly. And if you want to implement a new feature into one thing, in a monolithic architecture, you would have to like add a new feature to the whole thing, right? But in microservices, you just have to go to this one single thing that you want to change, and you change that and deploy the app. And so that's one advantage of a microservice architecture. In the case of monoliths, what you would have to do is you will have to deploy the whole app, because everything is in the same place, and making an addition means making an addition to everything. So that would mean you would have to deploy the whole thing again, and that can be a big overhead and big issue if we are deploying again and again. But in the case of microservices, we just have one thing that we are updating at a given time. Let's say you're just updating the chat feature, so you just have to go to that program that manages chat feature and update that, and then just deploy that part. Everything else stays the same. So there's much more, it's much more easier to deploy stuff. And in the case of new developers that are coming onto our team, it is much easier to just assign them to this specific program. Okay, you have to manage the chat feature between users, so there's a separate team for that, and they manage the chat feature, right? So they don't have to worry about how everything else works. So this means, in the monolithic architecture, this would mean that when a new programmer comes onto our team, we would have to explain the whole thing to them, because everything is dependent upon everything else. Since it's just one big app, that means you would have to know how everything works to add a new feature, otherwise you might break something. So there's this is one big thing to consider. So if you are bringing in a new developer onto the team and it takes like a month or so to just tell them how everything, explain to them how everything works, then that means you should probably move on to a microservice architecture, because your app has become so bloated that it's much more harder to maintain as a monolith. So talking about deciding on which architecture we should use, um, for startups and small companies, they should just stick with monoliths, because you don't have any scalability issues right now, because you don't have to worry about that right now. Your main goal is to get the thing out into the market and start getting clients, and you can worry about the scalability issues when they come. So one thing that this new startup should keep in mind is keeping everything clean and separated out properly, even though it is a monolith, so that in the future, if you want to move into a microservices architecture, then it's much easier, because you have already everything organized very cleanly, and it becomes a much easier transition, other than just breaking down everything and building up everything from the ground up just to move into a different architecture. So if you are a bigger team though, then you should be making use of microservices. If you are a big company or a big team, then you should definitely be using microservices, because that's how you will be able to make the maximum use out of the big team that you have. And if you are sure that the program that you're making is going to get like thousands and millions of requests, then you should probably go with microservices, if you know that the scalability is going to be a big issue from the start itself. So that's all I have to talk about today. Thank you.